Okay, so it's Todd Atkins, and I'm here with Clay Mars. And Clay, just kind of maybe you could introduce yourself a little bit to people who may not be familiar with you.
All right, Clay Mars, Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm 44 years old. Been training in jiu-jitsu and MMA since about 1999, but wrestled from second grade through all the way through high school. Wrestled 5 years in college at the University of Central Oklahoma. Fought professional MMA for on and off for about 8, 9 years. Had 7 professional fights and had probably, I don't know, dozens, if not 100, grappling matches. No gi, absolute, pretty much anything that I could do. And I've been coaching for years and years and years. I'm a full-time Tulsa firefighter, been on just short of 20 years on the fire department. So I'm in the Factory Grappling Club in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Now, when you got started with Mikey Burnett, when was that?
It was, well, we were friends in wrestling. He was a little bit older than me. And so we used to wrestle some prior to this, prior to his MMA career, prior to any of that. And he got into it at some local stuff. And he was kind of making that transition into it and said, hey, if you want to keep wrestling, you know, the percentage of going to like the Olympics or like a world trials is less than 1%. Try MMA and you may still get to wrestle, you know, all the fun parts of wrestling and still keep it going. And I did. And I fell in love. I didn't think I'd ever love anything more than wrestling, but I think I love no-gi grappling the most.
Now, when you were competing in high school, you competed at Union, right?
Yeah, Union High School in Tulsa.
Yeah, and I remember you telling me that you competed against Joe Zamora, who's like a legend at Broken Arrow, where I went to
Yes, he
school.
was. Yeah, he was. We were actually really good friends. We were never at the same weight in school. I was always the weight class above him. Summertime though, we went a couple times. He beat me in freestyle, but we trained together all the time in the summer, freestyle and Greco-Roman at the Broken Arrow freestyle Greco club. So we'd practice together, and then you know we'd be on opposite teams during the school year, but we'd be on the same team on Team Oklahoma in the summertime. So yeah, he was a special person. The ability he had, you know, to just to when he started so late to be able to do what he did. Who knows what he would have accomplished if he wouldn't have passed away.
Now, what do you know, for people that are listening to this who maybe went to school with me, what do you remember about Joe Zamora as a wrestler?
Unreal speed. There's nobody around that I knew that was better at a fireman's carry than myself, but maybe Joe. He might have been the only one. I could fireman's carry anybody in high school and a lot of people in college, but in high school especially. And he was probably the only guy that I knew that maybe had a better fireman's carry than me. But just an extreme athlete. Um, yeah, he was explosive, fast. He was good at everything he did, and it was amazing that I think the guy started in 8th grade, which is crazy. You know, that just doesn't happen very often. He was made for wrestling. So
Now, when you kind of transition from high school to college, kind of talk about, UCO and competing on that team.
uh, well, I verbally committed to OU, to Oklahoma University, and they recruited me really hard, and that's where I wanted to go. I thought last minute change up and went to UCO, who at that time they were already Division II NCAA champs, and they were stacked. And some guys that went to my high school actually went there already and decided to go there. And I had been varsity from 7th grade all the way through my senior year and never had a problem being the starter. And it took me years to be able to start there. That's how deep that place was. Um, I was a boy at 18 going against men, and it took a few years to be able to compete. I probably could have went somewhere else and done better because even in open tournaments, I could make it to the semifinals to get beat by one guy on my own team and then have to fight my way back through the consolations to try to get third or fourth. But, you know, at 142 is what I wrestled in college. Jerry Best, one of the probably the best wrestler I've ever known in my life as far as technician wise. I mean, even at Olympic level, his he's a coach, I think, at Allen, Texas. He has Best Wrestling Academy. I think he actually might have been Bo Nichols' coach in high school. He beat me, and he is a 3-time NCAA champ. I think he started at OSU early on and then left there and came to UCO and won 3 NCAA titles. And we had champs that won 34, 126, 134, 142, 150, and 158. So the best guys in the country were on my team, and it made it really hard to be a varsity position for a few years. So.
Now, I had heard you say on Todd Ryan's podcast that UCO at that time was like competitive with OU and.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, we like the Oklahoma Open. It's not a tournament they have anymore. You know, we would be in that, and I believe we beat OU that year in the tournament. And you know, we were behind OSU, which as expected. But you know, they went to like the Reno duels and everything, and they were beating a lot of Division I teams like Michigan and a lot of these very good D1 schools, which was kind of unheard of for a non-Division I school. But I'd say, you know, we were definitely a top 15 team there for a few years, including Division I. And Division II, we were always top 1, 2, or 3. We won it my freshman year, which was the 4th year in a row for us to win the title. And then we got second a couple of times, third a couple of times, had a couple of, you know, just little, you know, lost by a point or two in the national tournament, but we're always just a powerhouse. It kind of went down a few years after I graduated, and then they went right back up, and then they kind of came down. They're kind of coming up right now, but that's the way it works. You know, these other teams and other colleges start getting competitive, and it makes wrestling better as a whole. So.
How does a program like that get so heavy with talent, though? Can you kind of explain that? Because
yeah,
I always thought the D1 programs would get all the talent. How does that work?
UCO was kind of, to me, growing up, was kind of unheard of. But I think what happened was guys, you know, if you weren't that, you know, the number one guy in the state or maybe in the nation's going to OSU, and you know, the guys that are right behind that are going to OU. And some guys decided to go to UCO, and then also they started looking at UCO and how they're competing and beating Division I schools, that they're as good as any Division I school at that time. You know, maybe not the top 3 or 4 or 5 teams, but they can compete with anybody. And they had some guys on their team that I can promise were as good as any Division I top guys as far as individuals. And so they just had a really stacked team. And probably my senior year, I really started seeing that. And I was all-state my senior year, and that just happened to be at the University of Central Oklahoma. And kind of really learned a lot more about the team then, and decided really at the last second that that's where I want to go. I mean, OU offered me double the amount of money on scholarship to go there, but I just chose to go to UCO just because it was so deep. I thought, you know, this is where the best guys are right now, especially at my weight. At those mid-weights, it was just stacked. So.
Can you kind of explain is it kind of like a football team where you have starters and then you have guys that are kind of in the room? Is that how it works?
Yes, definitely. Because you think, and I'm saying now, I don't know, I can't keep up with it and know all the different changes, but there's usually 10 starters. And I bet we had close to 60 to 70 people in the room. And you're talking, you know, in high school, in any sport you go to, you have guys that maybe don't belong or just barely getting into that level. Everybody in the room's a state champion. You'd have guys coming in from like Ark City, Kansas, which is a powerhouse in Kansas, that were 3-time high school state champions, hadn't been beat in 3-4 years. And they were third team. That's how deep that room was. So it was the top of the top. And if you want to correlate that to jiu-jitsu, you've got a room of probably 40 black belts, you know, and 30 brown belts. That's literally the kind of how I could compare it. And it was just every day was a war. And I think Joe Rogan said at one time that wrestling, the one sport where even MMA, you can't really spar at 100%. Every day was 100% in those practices. It was a war every day. And you either, succeeded or failed, So I think that when I was a freshman, there was about 22 of us and about 3 transfers. So about 25 to 26 guys when I was a freshman that were brand new. When I graduated, I believe there was 2 of us, maybe 3. So, over those years, you lose, almost 95% or more of the guys that came as a freshman because they realize that this is no longer for fun. This is no longer a hobby, is a job. They pretty much own you. And while your friends are having fun at college, you're cutting weight. You're not having as much fun as everybody else. It was fun, but you had to live wrestling to be there. And as a 5th-year senior, I was there 5 years, and I never would say I burned out on wrestling, but I almost did. I was getting to that point, and that's why I'm glad that I fell into MMA and grappling and jiu-jitsu.
Now, in comparison to like training at Mikey's gym or whatever,
Yeah.
when you're at UCO, how much technique do they do versus live wrestling?
We did quite a bit. Like I said, that Jerry Best taught most of our technique. The guy was an Einstein on the mat. And so we learned a lot there, but we had, I would say 70% of the practice was live wrestling. And I don't know, what's crazy is wrestling has kind of changed, just like a lot of sports. I think they drill a lot more now than even we did. We were kind of the last of that era of, kind of like we were at Mikey's gym and ACA and Lion's Den, where we fought. It was like a war all the time. And now guys are seeing that maybe you don't have to fight wars every night. Maybe you drill more, you learn more technique and more low impact, and then you spar and go hard a couple of days of the week. There, we probably went hard if it wasn't the day before match, we were going 100%. So it was like a fight almost every day in practice. And we probably did have fights in practice because of that. So
now, when you transitioned, what was that experience like when you transitioned from UCO to your first MMA gym? What did you think of it?
It was easier than I thought because the level that we trained at and the fact that for the most part, I could take anyone down I wanted and I could control them. Yeah, sure. I didn't know what a triangle was. And I didn't know what a Kimura was. So occasionally I would get in trouble, but just that athleticism from wrestling and the balance, I didn't get swept hardly at all. It was easy, but Mikey and just me kind of, learning myself, knowing that I need to learn what I wasn't my best at, which was being off my back. So I really, really worked hard at trying to be good at what I didn't come into the sport with. So it's nice to just be on top and take people down and control and dominate. But in reality, you're going to run into a Johnny Hendricks or one of these guys that's a better wrestler or a better striker that drops you. And you better be able to work off your back. And just coming up through the sport in that early stages, you saw those world-class wrestlers that if they didn't get the takedown, they end up getting beat. So I told myself from early on, I'm only 5'7", barely, and I'm not the best striker, so I better be very good at jiu-jitsu. And so that was what I took, I just took it as a lesson to myself, like be very good at this. If I can't be on top, be very good off my back and be very good at submissions. So.
Now, the thing I noticed about training with you is you had a way of blending wrestling with jiu-jitsu, even with some of the submissions you used.
Oh, definitely.
It might be hard to answer this, but how did you kind of come up with that style that you had? Because it was unique.
Yeah, definitely. And our team was unique. And the fact that I wouldn't say we were a catch wrestling team, although I love catch. And I would say at least 40% of my game is a catch wrestling style. But to me, I think my biggest, positive or my biggest quality that I have that works for me is anti-jiu-jitsu. And for a guy that loves jiu-jitsu, I look at it as jiu-jitsu all came from one lineage for the most part. I mean, no matter where it came from, if it came from judo or if it came from the Gracies, everybody in the world is learning one style. So everyone hits an armbar pretty much the same. Everybody defends an armbar pretty much the same. So if I hit somebody with a move and from a jiu-jitsu move, no matter where they learned, it came from someone that taught them to defend a certain way. So just playing the odds, I know how they're going to defend. So I tried to modify that to predict how they were going to react. And and to me, that is what wins at the highest level, whether it be grappling or jiu-jitsu or MMA, is I see a lot of high-level wrestlers or a lot of high-level jiu-jitsu players that learn both styles, but they can't do them at the same time. They'll do really high-level wrestling, they'll do really high-level jiu-jitsu, and it goes back and forth. And in reality, you have to be able to blend them. And that's kind of what I figured out early on, and I think that worked well for me. That's how I was able to catch guys that probably on paper were better wrestlers or better jiu-jitsu guys than me, because I was able to catch them on the in-betweens, and that's what I think works the best.
Now, looking at some of the competitive jiu-jitsu now, it almost seems like, because of the predominance of the leg lockers, especially guys that are in the no-gi, there are still some guys that are wrestling more, like maybe Cyborg Ubreo. I saw him, he's kind of come along with his wrestling. But why do you think the leg locks, since they've been around forever, are so predominant now? I mean, people have been doing those forever.
Jiu-jitsu did it to itself as a sport. Anytime you make something a sport, whether it be judo or jiu-jitsu, you're actually weakening it. And people don't want to hear that, but when you have tournaments where you can't do a certain leg lock until you're a brown belt, no different than judo, where when it was, people got away from the ground game and it became more of the ippon from throwing from feet to back, then people concentrate on what it takes to win at sport. And when you do that, like as far as jiu-jitsu goes or grappling, people aren't learning leg locks because they can't do them in a tournament for the first, 4 to 8 years of their career. And so they're behind the 8 ball. Mikey and Ken Shamrock and the Lions Den early on. I mean, my first grappling tournament was about 4 to 5 months after I started, and I leg locked a guy in my first match. So, I mean, I wasn't even a white belt because I trained for 12 years without putting on the gi. So in reality, I'm learning leg locks at the same pace that I am learning every other submission from the upper body. And I think that's important. I'm not saying it's that they can't do that in tournaments, but you need to be learning it. And even my kids that I teach now that are 13, 14 years old, we're doing leg locks, and I'm not hitting them with heel hooks. I'm not showing them heel hooks, but they're going to be aware of it because I don't want them to turn 18 years old, and then just be clueless. It's like being clueless about wrestling, which you see in jiu-jitsu. And there's 25-year-old black belts in jiu-jitsu that can't wrestle as good as a junior high wrestler. And I see that in leg locking. And I hit leg locks and I'm decent at them. I used to hit them a lot more, but I would never say I was a leg lock specialist at all. But I've always been aware of them. And I think that's important, is that you have to be aware of it. So one day you're going to either have to use it or defend against it. And I think that the majority of people, especially maybe 5, 6 years ago, there's a few guys hitting them and doing really, really well, because a lot of people aren't getting it thrown at them at practices and tournaments. And so it's something new. So even a black belt level person, maybe like a blue belt level leg locker, and that's what's getting them caught. Now you see it more. My only problem with leg locking personally is it's like anything. It's like the guys that want to learn a underarm spin or a suplex in wrestling before they learn a double leg or a sprawl. It looks cool. It's awesome to see some rolling leg lock or rolling heel hook, and they don't spend time on getting good at a Kimura, which works for me 99% of the time, or a guillotine. Just the basics will always win. And people get really good at one side of it. And because in reality, it's a YouTube world. They want to be on a YouTube highlight, and that's the way that next generation sometimes is. They see that, and they want to get good at these things that look cool, but maybe only going to work, 10% of the time. So that's my thing on leg locking. It's as important as everything, but get your basics first, and be learning leg locks just right along with everything else.
But do you think the guys like Gordon Ryan and Gary Tonin, they can make these work because of the rules, or guys having to
I
kind of
think
forced to play their game, or what do you
I
think?
think they're forcing people to play their game, which I mean that's what a champion does. And in as far as me personally, just the mental, like I didn't have that in college. It took me till I was probably like 30 competing in the grappling circuits to like realize that sometimes I would play to other people's strengths and I would win a lot, but I think I've only lost a few times in my career in grappling. And when I did, I played as somebody else. And I finally like just got over that step of that. And it's a maturity thing. It's not an age thing, but a maturity of being able to figure it out that you're going to play my style regardless. And I think Gordon Ryan and Gary Tonin, these guys have forced their way upon people and they make people play their style. I mean, it's smart. Um, Eventually somebody will figure that out, just like, John Jones or anybody in MMA. Guys will be dominant for a long time until one person, breaks through that armor and figures it out, and then everybody does. And that's what's tough about being on top. When you're on top, you're training for everybody. When you're on top, people are only training for you. That's like Jordan Burroughs in wrestling. That's why he gets beat now sometimes, and it sucks. He still is the best, but the problem is everybody in the world, including all his teammates, are just trying to beat him every day, and that's what's going to, eventually happens to all these guys. So
Now, I kind of wanted to talk to you about these Caucasus wrestlers, Dagestan and
mm-hmm.
Chechens that we're seeing come in the UFC now. And
Yep.
from what I've noticed, they seem to be more effective at implementing the takedown and controlling than even the really good American wrestlers who can maybe get a takedown, but they lose the control. Or
Yep.
why do you think that is?
I believe their style. I was thinking about this, and I compare it to '90s like Iowa wrestling, like the Brands brothers. They're not fancy. They weren't super finesse wrestlers, but they beat the crap out of you to get to a position. When they were on top, you felt it. It was uncomfortable to be underneath them. It was uncomfortable to be held and controlled by them. They clubbed you on the back of the head snapped you, and it was a fight. Even though it was a wrestling match, it was a fight. And I feel like the style that like a Khabib's using is just that grind style, and it's very, very mean. I mean, it's Matt Hughes did that style. It's nothing really new. Sure, he may do a little bit different takedowns, but it's what Matt Hughes did. Was it fancy? No. Did it work on every single person in the world? Yeah, it did, because he just broke people in in the wrestling and the clinch and in the control. And in MMA, I was thinking about it, is probably control and positioning is almost more important than submissions. Submissions are great, but when someone beats you up in a position and just makes your life hell on bottom, then the punches and the strikes and the elbows open up, which then open up your submissions because you're getting beat up and you do something dumb because you're trying to get out of getting beat up. And I feel like their style is doing that. American wrestling, like I'll watch it now, especially some of these top guys like a Nolf, or even like an Askren, who are phenomenal wrestlers. It's a finesse style, which is good for grappling, but sometimes for MMA, that style, you can just get like a Robbie Lawler that's going to be just mean as hell and make your life hell. I mean, punish you for even shooting on them. And sometimes that finesse style can get beat by just grit and meanness. And I feel somebody like Khabib, it's not super fancy, but what he does is it's just very, very dominant, and it's just mean. And he keeps that pressure on, and he doesn't allow them to even have a chance to react. And then, once he gets to that control where he's throwing punches, and it may not just be like knockout blows, but he's not even giving them a chance to breathe. And I feel like, with Connor and a lot of these guys, that's what he did. He just grinds them down until they have to turn over, give up an arm, give up a neck, give up a position, and they're either going to get submitted or they're going to get knocked out. And that's what I feel like their style is just that grind style. Kind of like I said, like 90s or before American wrestling was.
So you think that's why Ashram kind of struggled, because he was more of a scrambler?
Yeah, and I like the scramble style. I think the scramble style is great, but if you look at, he wasn't more a grind wrestler, and I think Askren's phenomenal. I teach stuff that he does, and I think some of the techniques he had was phenomenal. He was kind of inventing his own style, which is great. But you in MMA, you have to be able to just grind people out and break them mentally, and sometimes finesse or not, like you may have the best finesse wrestling and be able to take anybody down, but you can't keep them there because they're fighting to get up, or you can't keep a dominant position. He did do that to some people, but I feel like that high level UFC guy that has been working on takedown defense and getting right back up, you have to be able to keep those guys down. And that's what Khabib does so well. He can keep people down, you know, and if they get up, they get beat up the whole time they're working to get up, and most likely he's going to take them down again.
Now, as a wrestler, did you watch like Nickel versus Ryan, or who was the other guy he competed against from Jersey? I forgot the guy's name.
Yeah, Downey.
Yeah, Downey. So what did you think of those matches as far as?
Yeah, it was good. I think I give all those guys, wrestlers and the jiu-jitsu guys, props for getting out of their element. The wrestlers a little bit more props because they're really, you know, putting their reputations on the line with like very limited, like months, 6 months maybe of grappling, and you're going against a Gordon Ryan. I mean, he's the equivalent of like an Olympic gold medalist in wrestling or judo or any other sport, and you're literally going in there as a novice at his level at what he's doing. But I thought they did well. I thought Bo Nickel and Downey both did exactly what they should have done. If those guys, either one of them or anybody at that level, could really dedicate when they're done with wrestling per se, and dedicate towards the jiu-jitsu. I mean, even if they get to like a purple belt level in jiu-jitsu, I mean, they're going to be hell for anybody.
Would a scrambling style like Askren or Nolf be more effective in like a jiu-jitsu setting?
Definitely, because that scramble can beat almost anybody's, because they scrambled their whole careers, and that wrestling scramble is so fast compared to most jiu-jitsu scrambles. Yeah, you watch what they do, and they catch, you know, they'll catch just like the tip of someone's arm with their leg, like Nolf does all the time. And they're going to get somebody in trouble. And if they learn like an arm lock or a choke from that on that scramble, they're going to catch a lot of good people that maybe on paper are better than them at jiu-jitsu. And like I said, the key is, and I feel like I'm a pretty good scrambler, and I do that too, but I also try to keep a really heavy dominant top game, because sometimes you got to shut the game down. And I try to tell my students that, and my teammates that if they're really good scramblers, it's not good that you try to scramble also. I'll scramble to get to where I want to be, which is like a side mount, and then I'm going to shut the game down to the snail's pace and slow it down, and then just grind them out so much that they have to do something stupid or something to get themselves out of position to give me something. But if they're a really good scrambler, they're not just going to give you an arm. They're just not going to give you a submission. But if you hold them there and just keep them in that position where, you know, on points or judges in a grappling match, you're going to win. If you get a takedown and side mount and hold them there for 5 to 10 minutes, you're going to win. They have to do something now out of their element and maybe put themselves in danger to give you the submission or to give you their back or give you another dominant position.
Now, are there any fights like in the UFC that you're looking forward to, or have you been paying attention to a lot of these?
Oh, I pay attention to about half of it. I've lived it so long that I don't watch it as much as I used to. But there's not any certain one. I mean, I'm not a huge John Jones fan. I used to be early on, but no, not really any certain person. I really do like me, Stipe. I think he's great. I like the DC. He's a great person. But I like to see some of these dominant wrestlers do well and win. And most of the MMA that I deal with now is my students that are trying to come up and really push their careers and try to just at least give them some knowledge so they can achieve their dreams.
So can you kind of describe the difference maybe of Mikey's versus kind of what you're doing now?
Um,
For people
the
that never trained
core,
at Mikey's
yeah,
gym, can you kind of tell them what that was like?
at Mikey's and an Absolute Combat Alliance, which was a lot of the team, it was a war every day, and it wasn't for customers, it wasn't for business. It was about fighting and getting tough, and everybody wanted to fight, and it was a super tight knit team. And but in reality, you see some of these gyms now that are super successful, and I don't necessarily mean successful on like a national stage in grappling or MMA. They're they're very successful businesses, and they do very, very well because they cater to a bigger crowd. Because in reality, what pays the bills is your Joe Blow that wants to learn some kind of self-defense, just for something to do, for a hobby or an exercise. And so once I opened my gym, I have both. And I realized, in reality, MMA fighters are never going to pay the bills, because a lot of them are really, struggling just to be able to do it. And, but what pays the bills, is classes and niche things like women's classes and kids classes and traditional BJJ, things that your average families want to do to better themselves. And I really like it. I never in my life would have ever dreamed that I wanted to teach kids. I had like 2 kids that I would teach private lessons to, and they were already very good. And I loved that. But I thought, you know what, I don't think I've got it in me to teach 5, 6, 7-year-olds that know absolutely nothing. But we did it anyway, and I absolutely love it. Me and a girl named Kayla DeMoss, who's one of my blue belts, helps me teach. Daniel Roberts helps me teach. He's a black belt and UFC vet. And I have a couple other people like Danny DeMoss and some other high-level jiu-jitsu guys. And I kind of pride myself on our gym is sometimes kids programs or these like beginner programs have like a blue belt in their teaching. It kind of gets pushed off on them. And I like having these black belts and these high level guys and they're teaching my kids, because in reality, they're the future, and not just of grappling and stuff, but they're the future of my gym. They are my adult team 10 years, 15 years from now. And like I said, I'm 44. I'm really the last one that's still doing it as much as I am. I still have the Dave Heaths, the Ryan McLeans that are coming in occasionally, but it's not all the time. And eventually I'm going to be too old to keep doing this, and I have to, refill the ranks so my team can just keep carrying the torch. And so I really like my kids program. I treat them like adults, and we work hard, and I push them. And I know I'm not saying it's the right or the right way to do business, but I want my kids to win titles, and we're not there to play dodgeball and to play games, and I think that the kids that I get figure that out. Their parents figure it out. I have great parents that bring their kids there, and we're just trying to build that. And I think that's the biggest difference between that Mikey's and ACA is that I'm doing both. I'm doing the business side and the casual grapplers and casual self-defense customers and the pro MMA and pro grapplers. So
Now, you're a firefighter also, so how much time do you have to still dedicate to teaching and coaching and things like that?
I work 72 hours a week on the fire department. I'm a captain on Tulsa. I've been on just short of 20 years. And I would say I'm probably at my gym 30 hours a week. So I'm there a lot. I teach, if I'm off duty, I teach Monday night gi, Wednesday night wrestling, and then Tuesday and Thursday noon, which is the no gi, which is most of my killers. That's the Daniel Roberts and all these guys that have just, 10 to 20 years experience that have done pro MMA and pro grappling. And I teach the 2 kids classes on Tuesday, Thursdays. So I'm there a lot, but I think it's important because people are there. Some of the people come there for me or the team that I'm here to build. And I've surrounded myself with great people that have one goal, and that's to have the factory at that highest level in every aspect, not just jiu-jitsu. And by doing that, I've kind of, I know that I've got these people I can depend on that aren't just looking out for just themselves, but again, like the future for the team itself. So
Now, most jobs are 40 hours a week. How does that happen that you work 72 hours a week?
24 on, 48 off. So I may work 72 in a week, and I may work 42 or 48. It just depends how the day falls. If the week starts on Sunday, if I start on a Sunday, then I work 72 that week. So, yep.
And that's typical for all firefighters.
For Tulsa, it is. Other states and other countries aren't always on that, but Tulsa's been on that since the 50s, where we work 24 on, 48 off. So my 48 off is at the gym both days.
And anything over 40 is overtime?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Definitely.
So,
Yeah.
That's a good gig there.
Yep. Definitely.
Hard work.
I love the job. It allows me to, I've got a great crew, and a couple of them grapple. One of my purple belts is at my fire station, and another guy that's grappled me for years is not even belted, but I mean, he would probably be a blue belt. But you know, we get to lift weights at work, so we lift weights in the morning, and in the afternoon we do cardio, and so we're outside running and doing sprints and doing the row machine. So it's great that we get to work out while we're at work. So even my off days, my off days from the gym, I'm still working out there. Because in reality, like I say, I'm 44 and I got to keep pushing it, because I'm not trying to win a world title here, but if I don't keep training, then my guys can't. And that's my goal. You know, people still want me to compete, and there's parts of me that want to, and I'm not saying I won't ever, but I kind of, my dreams right now are just living through these others and not trying to prove that I'm still good or anything like that. I mean, I get joy when I watch my kids, like this AGF the other day. I took 10 kids and they won 13 golds with 10 kids. I mean, I can't ask for any more than that. And my adults are pretty much the same. So I just literally, I'm trying to pass on what I've done, so that next generation. I mean, my goal, and I think anybody's goal, should be that eventually one day all my students should all be better than me. I mean, some guys can't let go of their pride and their own legacy, but that is my legacy. If I can make sure every one of my guys is better than I ever was, then that's my goal. So
now, how much is Bobby training with you?
Quite Burke. A bit. Bobby Burke, quite a bit. He was off some during the COVID stuff, but he's back now, and he trained with me. What's today? I'm a firefighter, so we never know what day it is. Every day is either Monday or Friday is how we feel, because we work one day on and we're off two. So like, but I worked out with him yesterday at the kids class, and then he stays, and I allow some of my top kids like him, they do the kids class for an hour and a half, and then the adult class starts at 7 o'clock, and he does the adult class too. And then he went to the wrestling on Wednesday night too. So I train with him quite a bit. I don't do as many privates anymore. I don't get to do a lot of private lessons anymore, just because I'm at the gym teaching, and I don't have that many hours. I'd love to, because that's a lot of the money to be made is in private lessons. But I really push all my brown belts and my black belts, like, dude, do private lessons. Make yourself. I don't take any money from them. I want them to build for themselves, build their own legacy, and you know, teach as many private lessons as you want. So okay. One day maybe.
Now, as we're wrapping up this interview, I kind of wondering if there was anything you would want to like let people know you're doing. Obviously, you talked about the gym quite a bit, or maybe some advice for people who are trying to get good at jiu-jitsu or something in your eyes, or wrestling even, is with all of the experience that you have.
Train. The more days in the room, the better you're going to get. And I see guys that, you know, it takes 3-4 years to get a blue belt. They're coming a couple of days a week. And I see guys that come 5 days a week. You know, I've got this guy right now, Damon Rogers, who trained with me all the way back at the Mikey's days when he was a teenager. He's been coming back in, and, you know, the guys, I've got him and about 3 or 4 of my guys that are literally doing the noon class and the evening class 4 days a week. They're getting 8 classes a week. They're doing more classes in a week than a lot of people are doing in a month. How good are they going to get? You know, and that's what you have to do. And I realize it's a sacrifice. You got a job, you got a wife, you got kids. It's tough to do. But if this is what you want to do, mat time. That's what it's all about, whether it's wrestling or jiu-jitsu or judo or MMA, every day on the mat. And then also, and it's not always the biggest thing in jiu-jitsu, it was a little bit bigger in wrestling, is I'm still a fan of weightlifting and the working out off the mat, because it can't all be done on the mat. And I'm not saying you can't, but if you take two guys that are exactly equal in their jiu-jitsu and their wrestling and their grappling, you know, the stronger athlete is usually going to win because the work he's putting in when he's off the mat. And sometimes just maybe it's a generational thing, or the way the sport's evolved, that maybe people don't do it as much. But I mean, the more time you're training, you know, the better off you are. Because if you aren't training, your opponent is somewhere somebody's training every minute of the day. And I train probably more than probably most of my students, because I'm always doing something. And the reason why is, like, I don't want to lose what I have. I'm still trying to gain. And when you hit a certain level, you know, when you're down at the white and the blue belt levels, you're growing so fast. I mean, in 6 months' time, you're twice as good as you were. When you hit that black belt level, or like a black belt, like wrestler level, you don't get that. You don't have that peak where you just keep climbing. You kind of plateau out. So you either have to put yourself in situations that you're not as good at, be it maybe off your back, or playing leg game, or striking, or working on your takedowns or takedown defense, and you have to work on something else. You have to find something that you're not as good at, and just keep kind of reinventing yourself. So, and sometimes I've told some of my students that get injured, I've had injuries throughout with knee surgeries and broken hands, that, you know, some of those injuries, as bad as I hated them, they made me learn new things. They made me, if I hurt my right knee, I had to learn half guard for 6 months. So, you know, you get good.
I don't know. What is that in the back?
That's my phone. I'm sorry. That's a Star Wars ringtone. So.
Well, you know, Clay, I appreciate you taking the time out. I know you're a busy guy, and you know, it's kind of took some time to get you on, but I always wanted to get you on because
Definitely, man.
You had a, you know, unique style, a different perspective to grappling, and you know, it's something I really wanted people to hear and kind of learn more about you.
Yeah.
Now, people want
my whole thing, man, is if you're getting into grappling right now, whether you were a jiu-jitsu player or a wrestler, here's the simple path. And I'm not saying it because I'm some stud at it, is what is everybody else in the world learning? They're almost all the styles are based on the same thing. People wrestle the same way. They came from like the certain people, or they do jiu-jitsu the same way. You have to literally predict how everybody else in the world is training and find ways to beat that, you know, and that to me is the key. You have to find what works for you. That is, and like I said, I'm not the most technical submission guy, but what I have figured out is I know when I put a guillotine on you that most likely you're going to defend one of two ways. And I'm literally doing a guillotine to get you to react so I can do a different submission. And that's what I figured out early on. And I'm, you know, and that's what I say. That's what people need to do. Figure out and predict what other people are going to do, and then work your game off that.
Now, people kind of want to follow what you're doing or follow your gym. Where can they find you at?
Instagram or Facebook, the Factory Grappling Club. You can follow me or follow that. I don't have a website because I'm 44 and it's enough just to do Facebook and Instagram, but eventually I probably will. But follow it on there. Come try out a class. You know, your first class is free. I have great coaches. I can tell you one thing about my gym over a lot of gyms is it may be a business, but it's treated more like a family. People will always feel welcome there. And we may be some tough guys and some really tough competitors, but man, it is a family and they always treat everybody equally and great. And it might be the fit for you. And if you want to go high, we have a high level, a high caliber. We may not have the numbers, but our quality is, I mean, second to none.
Well, Clay, you know, again, I appreciate you taking the time, and look forward to speaking again sometime.
All right, man. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Take care.
All right, see you. Bye.